The cobblestone streets rumble with the footsteps of 1,000 spectators. You hear the distant clash of armor and the soaring melody of minstrels. A wave of color floods the city as silk banners flutter from every window. Giants crafted from wood and cloth tower over the crowd, while a king rides past on a horse draped in gold. This was a medieval pageant, a living tapestry woven from more than mere celebration. We are about to uncover 30 of history's most spectacular pageants, and by the end, you will see the entire medieval world through the lens of its greatest public spectacles. Behind the glittering facade of these events lay fierce political battles and profound spiritual yearnings. Why did a duke host a feast so costly it nearly bankrupted his court? How could a simple shepherd's joust challenge the very ideals of knighthood? The answers reveal a world where drama was power and faith was a public performance. What does it truly take to build a spectacle that an entire city will never forget? London held its breath as a young king approached its gates. This was the royal entry of Richard II in 1392, a spectacle carefully designed to mend a fractured kingdom. Just years earlier, the Peasants' Revolt had seen the city streets run with blood and rebellion. Now, the same gates that had once been stormed by angry mobs were draped in rich tapestries. Elaborate stages called tableau vivants, or living pictures, lined the procession route. On these platforms, actors posed as biblical kings and saints, drawing a direct parallel between divine right and Richard's own rule. At one stop, a castle made of paper and wood symbolized the city itself, and from its towers, young girls showered the king with golden leaves. The city's merchants presented him with symbolic gifts, not just gold and jewels, but a richly bound Bible and a golden crown. Each gift was a loaded gesture, a public affirmation of their loyalty, and a subtle reminder of their expectations. This entire pageant was a scripted drama of reconciliation. Every tableau, every song, and every gift was a line in a political play. The city was performing its submission, and the king was performing his gracious acceptance. Through this brilliant spectacle, Richard II cemented his authority not by force of arms, but by the power of a shared public story. He demonstrated that a king's power was negotiated in the open air, witnessed by thousands. This grand entry set the stage for every royal procession that would follow, proving that the most potent politics were often cloaked in celebration. But while kings solidified power in city streets, dukes dreamed of reclaiming empires. In the city of Lille, the hall of Philip the Good, Duke of Burgundy, became the stage for an ambition so vast it could only be expressed through sheer, breathtaking fantasy. This was the Feast of the Pheasant, held in 1454. Its official purpose was a sacred vow, a call for a new crusade to retake Constantinople from the Ottoman Turks, which had fallen just the year before. But the true goal was to position Philip as the greatest champion of Christendom, a leader whose piety was matched only by his immense wealth. The feast was a symphony of excess. Guests entered a hall draped in silks and tapestries, where fountains ran not with water, but with wine. A giant pie was baked, and from it emerged a full 28 musicians, playing a joyful tune to the stunned nobility. Yet the centerpiece was both bizarre and deeply symbolic. A live pheasant, its feathers adorned with rich gold, was presented to the Duke. With his court as witness, Philip and his knights made a solemn vow upon this beautiful bird. They pledged to embark on that holy war, a vow that transformed a courtly entertainment into a sacred, chivalric contract. The cost was astronomical, a fortune spent on costumes, food, and mechanical wonders, including a model church with a choir singing from inside its walls. This was not merely a party, it was a political argument crafted from sugar, silk, and spectacle. The Feast of the Pheasant demonstrated that in the medieval world, faith and fantasy were powerful currencies. It showed how a ruler could use a grand pageant to forge a shared mission, binding his nobles to a cause greater than themselves, even if that cause, in the end, would prove to be a magnificent and costly dream. While dukes feasted in halls of gold, an entire city turned its streets into a moving stage for the divine. In the bustling merchant city of York, the annual Corpus Christi festival transformed the mundane urban landscape into a living Bible. This was not a single play in a fixed location, but a sprawling cycle of dozens of short performances, each mounted on its own wheeled pageant wagon. These wagons rolled in a precise procession from one designated station to the next, allowing crowds gathered throughout the city to watch the entire story of salvation unfold before their eyes, from the creation of the world to its final judgment. The responsibility for each play fell to the city's powerful trade guilds. The shipwrights, for instance, would naturally produce the story of Noah's Ark, showcasing their craft in the construction of a miniature ship on a wagon. The bakers took on the Last Supper, and the goldsmiths were responsible for the adoration of the Magi and their gifts of gold. For the guilds, this was far more than a religious duty. It was the ultimate civic advertisement, a chance to publicly demonstrate their skill, wealth, and piety to every citizen and visiting merchant. The entire cycle was a massive logistical and financial undertaking, uniting the city in a common project that blurred the lines between commerce and worship. Could there be a more powerful form of devotion than building the very vehicle that carried a scene from Scripture through your own neighborhood? This year-long preparation culminated in a single, breathtaking day where the spiritual and the material world became one. The streets of York did not just host a play, they became the pathway to heaven itself, a testament to a faith that was as public and practical as it was profound. Yet even these grand civic and courtly displays could be distilled into the quest for a single knight's honor. For over a year, a lone shield emblazoned with a white lady hung in the court of a Burgundian noble. This was the challenge of the chevalier, the knight of the green shield with the white lady, a pass d'armes, or passage of arms, that began in 1449. The knight who pledged to defend this shield, Jacques de Lalaine, was not preparing for a simple tournament. He declared he would defend this symbolic emblem for an entire year and a day against all comers in a series of highly stylized combats. The rules were as elaborate as the symbolism, challenges were delivered with poetic flourish, and the actual fights were tightly controlled to showcase skill and courage without unnecessary death. Combatants fought with blunted lances in the joust, and in foot combat, they used swords of war, which were still sharp, but the encounters were often stopped by judges before a lethal blow could land. The entire spectacle was a theatrical performance of chivalric ideals. By tying his identity to the White Lady, a figure representing an idealized, unattainable woman, Jacques de Lalaine was fighting not for land or political favor, but for personal glory and the principles of courtly love. His valor was dedicated to a lady's honor, which in turn elevated his own fame throughout the courts of Europe. This pageant transformed violent combat into a refined art, a public drama where the real prize was not a purse of gold, but a story that would be told and retold for generations. It proved that in an age of growing state power, the individual knight could still carve his name into history through a spectacle of personal prowess and unwavering devotion. Yet for all its focus on individual glory, the most powerful pageants were those that made an entire city the hero of its own story. As the summer sun dipped below the rooftops of London, the city did not sleep. It armed itself. The London Midsummer Watch was an astonishing spectacle born from a simple, practical need, the annual inspection of the city's night watchmen. But over time, this functional review exploded into a full-blown military parade, a roaring declaration of London's strength. On the eve of St. John the Baptist's feast day, the streets thronged with citizens marching in polished armor. They were not professional soldiers, but merchants, craftsmen, and apprentices, all organized by their wards and guilds. This was the city's militia on display, a public assurance that London could defend itself against any threat. But the true marvel was the pageantry woven into this show of force. Elaborate floats rolled through the narrow lanes, featuring giants crafted from wood and canvas, their towering forms lit by hundreds of flickering torches and cresset lamps. There were pageants depicting scenes from the Bible and from classical history, all financed and staffed by the wealthy trade guilds. The grocers, the goldsmiths, the skinners, each vied to present the most impressive display, turning a civic duty into a fierce but friendly competition. The clatter of marching feet and the gleam of weaponry were accompanied by the music of waits and minstrels, creating a symphony of civic pride. This was more than a simple celebration, it was a calculated performance of readiness and unity. Every citizen who marched, every guild that sponsored a giant, was actively participating in the defense and glorification of their home. The Midsummer Watch demonstrated that a city's true power lay not just in its walls and wealth, but in the shared spirit of its people, a spirit made visible for one brilliant, torchlit night each year. A queen's first step into her capital was a delicate political maneuver. When Isabeau of Bavaria entered Paris in 1389, the city staged a spectacle of such intricate detail that its script survives to this day. Her procession was a moving argument for her legitimacy, designed to cement her place in a kingdom still wary of its new foreign queen. At the city gate, she encountered a towering castle crafted entirely from wood and fabric, a shimmering recreation of the heavenly Jerusalem. Actors portraying angels sang from its turrets, while prophets welcomed her with verses linking her arrival to divine providence. This was more than a beautiful scene, it was a direct claim. By framing Isabeau's entry as a heavenly event, the city's planners were placing her within a sacred narrative, suggesting her rule was part of a celestial plan. Further along her route, another stage came to life with the story of the Nine Worthies. These were 9 heroic figures from history and legend, 3 from the classical world, 3 from the Old Testament, and 3 from Christian history. Actors in magnificent costumes embodied these paragons of virtue, each one stepping forward to pledge their symbolic allegiance to the queen. This tableau connected Isabeau to a timeless lineage of great rulers, implying that she, too, belonged in their illustrious company. Every element of the pageant, from the angelic choirs to the heroic pledges, was a deliberate piece of political theater. The city of Paris used its immense wealth and artistic talent not just to welcome a queen, but to construct her public identity before the eyes of thousands. It was a brilliant display of loyalty that also served as a powerful reminder. The capital itself was a key player in the monarchy, capable of bestowing legitimacy through the sheer force of its spectacular approval. A wedding in Bruges became a declaration of power, written not on parchment, but in solid gold. For the union of Charles the Bold and Margaret of York in 1468, the city staged a pageant so lavish it would become the stuff of legend, the pageant of the Golden Tree. At its heart stood an enormous artificial tree, a masterpiece of the woodcarver's art, its branches not bearing leaves, but laden with golden fruit and glittering jewels. This was more than a centerpiece, it was a potent symbol of the Burgundian state itself, a dynasty so wealthy it could literally hang its riches from a tree for all to see. The celebration stretched for days, a relentless display of opulence designed to overwhelm foreign dignitaries and rivals alike. Knights clashed in brilliantly choreographed jousts where the themes were not just martial, but deeply allegorical, celebrating the virtues of the groom and the lineage of the bride. Inside the ducal palace, feasts unfolded with a theatrical flair, each course introduced by costumed performers representing figures from mythology and romance. But the true marvel, the moment that pushed this spectacle from the magnificent to the nearly miraculous, was the arrival of a mechanical griffin. This mythical beast, crafted from wood and leather and animated by hidden gears, descended into the hall, astonishing the guests. It carried a live elephant, a creature most Europeans had only heard of in travelers' tales, and on the elephant's back sat an actor portraying the Oriental hero Jason, complete with the golden fleece. This single impossible tableau was a statement of global ambition. It declared that the wonders of the entire world, even its most distant and mythical corners, were within the grasp of the Burgundian court. Every golden apple on that tree, every tilt of a lance, and every gear in that griffin served a single purpose: to broadcast a message of unchallengeable power and limitless resources. This was the Burgundian dream made real, a world where politics and fantasy merged into one dazzling, unforgettable performance. Far from the royal courts and capital cities, the spirit of the pageant thrived in the heart of England's market towns. In Shrewsbury, a bustling hub on the River Severn, the annual show was a spectacle entirely of the people's own making. This was not a state-sponsored drama of power, but a vibrant expression of local identity, woven together from the guilds, the parish, and the very streets the townsfolk walked every day. The Shrewsbury show brilliantly fused a trade guild procession with biblical playlets and the raucous, earthy energy of giants and hobby horses. Each element served a distinct social purpose. The guilds marched in their finest regalia, a living catalogue of the town's economy, from the drapers and mercers to the smiths and shoemakers. Their orderly parade reinforced the town's strict social hierarchy, visually mapping out who held economic power and prestige. Following the guilds came the plays, short biblical scenes performed on movable stages. Unlike the grand, day-long cycle in York, Shrewsbury's plays were a more modest affair, focusing on key stories that resonated with a local audience, often performed by the guild members themselves. Then came the crowd pleasers, the giants and hobby horses. These were figures of pure folk celebration, towering puppets and costumed dancers that wove through the crowd, eliciting laughter and awe. The hobby horse, a man in a frame covered with a cloth, would dart and prance, playfully chasing spectators in a ritual that blurred the line between performance and communal participation. This unique local blend created a pageant that was deeply rooted in its community. It was not trying to impress foreign ambassadors or a skeptical monarch. Its entire purpose was to bind the town itself together, to affirm its internal order through the guilds, its faith through the plays, and its collective joy through the shared, chaotic fun of the giants. The Shrewsbury show proved that the most enduring pageants were not always the most expensive or politically complex, but those that truly belonged to the people who made them. The rebellious city of Ghent fell silent under the weight of a spectacular demand. In 1458, Duke Philip the Good arrived not with an army, but with a pageant, transforming the city's defiance into a stage for his own glory. The occasion was the baptism of his son, but the true purpose was a political masterstroke. For the festivities, the city was compelled to organize a massive ommegang, a grand procession weaving through its very heart. This was not a celebration Ghent created for itself. It was a script written by the Duke and imposed upon his most troublesome subjects. The procession was a breathtaking parade of history and scripture, featuring elaborate floats depicting scenes from the Bible and from the storied past of Burgundy itself. Citizens watched as tableau of King David and the Queen of Sheba rolled past, each scene meticulously chosen to draw a parallel between these ancient rulers and the House of Burgundy. The message was unmistakable. Philip's dynasty was the latest chapter in a sacred and heroic lineage. By forcing the city's guilds and merchants to fund and participate in this spectacle, the Duke achieved a profound psychological victory. The people of Ghent were not merely spectators, They became actors in a drama that celebrated their own ruler's power. They built the floats, they wore the costumes, and they marched in the procession, publicly performing their own submission. How could you rebel against a duke whose authority was so vividly painted across your own city streets? The Ghent festivities of 1458 demonstrated that the most effective political tool was sometimes not a siege engine, but a brilliantly conceived parade. It used the city's own energy and labor to build a cage of loyalty, proving that a ruler could conquer a population not by breaking down its gates, but by commandeering its very soul for a day. Across the Irish Sea, the city of Dublin staged its own testament to faith and civic order. The Dublin Corpus Christi play was a sprawling cycle of biblical dramas, very much like the grand pageants of York and Chester. For centuries, this performance transformed the city's streets into a pathway of salvation, telling stories from the creation of the world to the final judgment. But here, in a land under English control, the pageant carried an added, profound weight. It was not merely a reflection of piety, it was a powerful tool of cultural identity and colonial assertion. The surviving records, though fragmentary, paint a vivid picture of its organization. Just as in England, the city's trade guilds were the engine behind the spectacle. The bakers would produce the play of the Last Supper, the vintners the miracle at Cana, and the smiths likely took on the dramatic Crucifixion. Their involvement was a public declaration of their place in the social fabric, a demonstration of wealth, skill, and orthodox belief. Yet in Dublin, this was more than civic pride, it was a performance of civility itself. For the English settlers and administrators living in Ireland, the Corpus Christi play was a potent symbol of their community. It visibly differentiated them from the native Irish population, whose religious and cultural practices were often viewed as alien and uncivilized by the colonial authorities. Staging this immensely complex, authorized version of the Bible in the heart of the city was a way of claiming the space, both physically and spiritually, for English tradition and Roman Catholic orthodoxy. The pageant was a living wall, built not of stone, but of scripture and spectacle, asserting a particular vision of order in a contested land. It proved that these dramatic cycles were not just for entertainment or even local devotion, they could be exported as instruments of cultural power, adapting an English tradition to cement a community's identity far from home. But what if the hero of the pageant was not a knight, but a simple shepherdess? In 1449, the same Burgundian court that staged the weighty vows of the Feast of the Pheasant also produced a spectacle of pure, playful charm, the Passe de la Berger, or the Shepherd's Joust. Here, the entire world of chivalry was turned playfully on its head. The central figure was not a duke or a celebrated champion, but a young woman dressed as a shepherdess, tasked with defending a symbolic flock of sheep from any knight who dared to challenge her. The joust itself was a highly stylized and theatrical affair. Knights would ride against the shepherdess, not to unhorse her, for she was on foot, but to score points in a game of skill and gallantry. The entire event was framed by a pastoral fantasy, a romantic vision of rural life that was immensely popular in courtly literature. This was not a test of raw martial power, but a delicate dance of courtly love and wit. The shepherdess, often portrayed by a noble lady, represented an idealized innocence and purity, while the knights performed their valor for her approval. In doing so, the pageant gently parodied the very conventions of chivalry it appeared to celebrate. It asked a subtle question of its noble audience: what is true courage when the opponent is a symbolic maiden and the prize is a smile? This spectacle revealed that pageants were not always about solemn statecraft or profound piety. They could also be a space for social experimentation, a safe stage where the rigid roles of knight and commoner, man and woman, could be temporarily rearranged for the sake of poetry and play. It proved that the most serious courts sometimes needed the wisdom of a make-believe shepherd girl to remind them that power could also be found in grace and gentle mockery. The haunting melody of the Coventry Carol first echoed not in a quiet church, but through the crowded, noisy streets of a city pouring its heart into a sacred story. Coventry's mystery plays were a monumental undertaking, a cycle of biblical dramas that defined the city's spiritual and economic life for generations. The responsibility for these plays fell squarely on the shoulders of the trade guilds, each one assigned a specific story that often reflected their craft. The Shearman and Tailors Guild, for instance, was entrusted with one of the most poignant and dramatic sequences, the Nativity story and the subsequent massacre of the innocents. It was for this somber scene that the Coventry Carol was written, a lullaby sung by the mothers of Bethlehem as they mourned their children. The guild did not merely act out the play, they became its producers, financiers, and stage managers. They paid for the script, commissioned the costumes, built the elaborate pageant wagon that served as a mobile stage, and hired the actors, often from within their own membership. This was not a casual expense. Records show the guilds levied special taxes on their members to fund the productions, a significant financial burden that was also a profound source of civic pride. The entire city had a stake in the performance's success. For weeks leading up to Corpus Christi, Coventry transformed into a massive, open-air rehearsal space. The sound of carpenters building wagons blended with actors learning their lines and guild masters debating the finer points of theology. On the day of the performance, the city's normal commerce ceased. The streets belonged to the story, and every citizen, from the wealthiest merchant to the poorest apprentice, became part of the audience. This community-funded drama was more than a religious service, it was the city's heartbeat. The plays reinforced social bonds, showcased economic power, and provided a shared emotional experience, all while turning a biblical narrative into a tangible, local event. The survival of the Coventry Carol alone is a testament to the deep impression these plays left, a fragile, beautiful song preserved because an entire city once believed in the power of bringing its faith to life on the streets it called home. The city of Brussels presented its new duchess with a living instruction manual. Joanna of Castile, mother of the future Emperor Charles V, processed through the streets in 1496, and at every turn, the city staged a lesson in power. Her joyous entry was a masterpiece of political theater, a series of elaborate tableaux designed not just to welcome her, but to educate her. This was a mirror for princes, a tradition where allegorical figures and biblical scenes were used to visually communicate the virtues and duties of a perfect ruler. At one stage, Joanna encountered a representation of justice, a solemn figure holding her scales and sword, a clear reminder that her primary duty was to govern with impartial fairness. Another platform might showcase the story of the wise King Solomon, emphasizing the divine gift of good judgment. The entire route was a carefully curated syllabus for a new duchess. The city's most powerful guilds and civic leaders financed these living pictures, using their art to outline a contract. Their lavish welcome was an investment, and in return, they expected their new ruler to embody the virtues they so expensively portrayed. Could any young ruler watch these scenes of ideal kingship and not feel the weight of that expectation? The spectacle was a beautiful, unspoken negotiation. It demonstrated that a royal entry was far more than a parade. It was a crucial moment of political formation where the ideals of governance were acted out in the open air, impressing themselves upon the mind of the ruler and the populace alike. The city itself became the teacher, and its new duchess, the most important student in the world. While Joanna of Castile was learning the principles of good governance, a very different kind of lesson was unfolding in the streets of Barcelona, one designed to terrify its audience into spiritual obedience. The Consuta de El Antichrist was a unique and chilling pageant play, a Catalan masterpiece that turned the entire city into a stage for the ultimate battle between good and evil. Its central character was not a saint or a biblical king, but the Antichrist himself. This was not a simple retelling of Scripture, but a powerful piece of apocalyptic propaganda, crafted to reinforce orthodox belief in a region perpetually wary of heresy. The play began with solemn, liturgical chants, echoing the rituals of the church, but it quickly escalated into a spectacular and frightening popular drama. The special effects were its most famous feature. Medieval stagecraft pushed to its terrifying limits. Trapdoors would spring open to disgorge demons, while the Antichrist performed false miracles through clever machinery, making statues weep blood or appear to raise the dead. The climax often involved a literal deus ex machina, where an actor playing God or an angel would be dramatically lowered from a high platform to strike down the impostor and restore divine order. This blending of sacred drama with visceral spectacle was deliberate. The church authorities and civic leaders who sponsored the play understood that to capture the hearts and minds of the populace, they had to compete with the raw emotional power of street theater. By making the abstract threat of heresy tangible and horrifying, the Consuta made orthodoxy feel like the only safe harbor in a world on the brink of eternal damnation. It asked every citizen a silent, urgent question: when the final deception comes, will you be strong enough to recognize the lie? This pageant was faith forged in fire and spectacle, a community's collective nightmare performed in the bright light of day to ensure its people would never succumb to the darkness. The dust of Smithfield swirled with the scent of sweat, horses, and ambition. In 1357, this open space just outside London's walls became the stage for a tournament of immense political significance, a classic chivalric pageant designed to project English strength at a critical moment in the Hundred Years' War. King Edward III himself presided, his presence a powerful symbol of a nation girding for continued conflict with France. The air thrummed with the thunder of hooves and the sharp crack of lances shattering on shields. Knights encased in gleaming steel charged at one another in the joust, each pass a display of martial skill meant to inspire both awe and confidence. But this was more than a simple display of violence. The combats were tightly regulated by the rules of chivalry, transforming raw aggression into a spectacle of controlled prowess, a performance of ideal knightly behavior for the roaring crowds. The true heart of the event, however, beat not just in the tiltyard, but in the symbolism surrounding it. King Edward was accompanied by his newly founded Order of the Garter, an elite brotherhood of knights bound by a solemn oath and the wearing of a distinctive blue garter. Their presence at the tournament was a masterstroke of political theater. It visually united the kingdom's greatest warriors under the king's personal banner, creating a living emblem of loyalty and shared purpose. After the day's combats, the celebration shifted to lavish feasts where the king and his garter knights dined together, reinforcing these bonds of fellowship. The entire Smithfield tournament was a carefully orchestrated engine of morale. For the nobility and the commoners who watched, it presented a compelling vision of a unified, warlike, and magnificent England, ready to pursue its king's claim to the French throne. It proved that a king could wield a tournament list as effectively as a battlefield, using the spectacle of chivalry to forge the spirit needed to win a war. But the ultimate pageant of power required no actors or allegories, only the cold, ordered reality of an army on parade. In the Flemish city of Lille, the monster was not a celebration but a calculated exhibition of force, a massive review where the entire Burgundian military assembled in full battle array. This was a spectacle stripped of mythological pretense, where the message was delivered not by golden trees or mechanical griffins, but by the silent, formidable presence of thousands of soldiers. The duke and his court would watch as rank upon rank of men marched past, their armor polished to a mirror shine, their banners catching the light. Each company was accounted for, its numbers and equipment meticulously checked by clerks in a process that was as much an administrative audit as a public display. For foreign ambassadors and spies mingling in the crowd, the sight was meant to be deeply unsettling. Here was the proof of Burgundy's logistical might, the sheer ability to muster, equip, and coordinate a modern fighting force. The rhythmic tramp of boots and the glint of massed spear points communicated a simple, brutal truth. This court's fantasies of crusade and empire were backed by real, overwhelming military power. The monster brilliantly blurred the line between a practical mustering and a theatrical performance. It transformed the mundane necessities of war finance, supply, and manpower into a chillingly beautiful drama of dominance. Why stage a fictional battle when you could simply open your armory and parade its contents through the city square? For any rival power watching, the message was unmistakable: the dream of Burgundy was built on a foundation of steel. A city's entire rhythm could be halted for a story of sacred fire. In the Breton capital of Rennes, the community did not just watch a play, they lived inside it for days on end. The Mr. de St. Laurent was a mammoth theatrical undertaking, a mystery play so vast it demanded the participation of hundreds of citizens and drained the city's coffers to bring the martyrdom of a deacon to life. This was not a simple procession or a single wagon play, but a full-scale dramatic production staged in the open air, with a fixed set and a script detailing the entire life and gruesome death of St. Lawrence. The resources required were staggering. Account books recorded payments for tons of timber to build the stage and bleachers, vast quantities of cloth for costumes, and barrels of wine to sustain the army of volunteers. But the most vital resource was human. The cast was drawn from the city itself, from wealthy merchants playing Roman officials to humble craftsmen taking the roles of soldiers and angels. For the duration of the performance, the normal boundaries of daily life dissolved. A baker became an apostle by day, returning to his ovens only after the final line was spoken. This collective effort transformed the performance into an act of profound, shared piety. Every citizen, whether on stage, building scenery, or feeding the cast, had a stake in the sacred story. The purpose was twofold. On one level, it was a massive public prayer, an act of devotion meant to secure the city's spiritual welfare through the reenactment of a holy life. On another, it was brilliant civic promotion. A city capable of mounting such a spectacle was announcing its wealth, its organizational skill, and its deep orthodoxy to the entire region. The stage became a temporary cathedral without walls, a sacred space where the divine and the urban merged. Could there be any stronger declaration of a city's identity than its willingness to pause all commerce and become, collectively, a vessel for a saint's enduring voice? A brilliant splash of crimson and gold captures a moment of triumph that was already fading. The Westminster Tournament Roll is not the event itself, but its ghost, a 30-foot-long illuminated manuscript that chronicles the spectacular jousts held by King Henry VIII in 1511. This lavish scroll was created to celebrate the birth of a son, an heir who would tragically live for only a few weeks, yet the roll endures, transforming a fleeting celebration into a permanent argument for Tudor power. It functions as a secondary pageant, a performance on vellum designed for those who were not there. Every detail is a piece of calculated propaganda. The roll depicts the king himself as the star jouster, a paragon of youthful strength and chivalric virtue, his armor gleaming even in painted form. The scenes are crowded with heralds, nobles, and spectators, all arranged to show a harmonious and magnificent court. This was not a simple record, it was an idealization. Why create such an elaborate chronicle? Because the roll was meant to be unrolled and read. its glorious images performing the tournament again and again for courtiers and foreign ambassadors. It extended the pageant's life far beyond the mud and sweat of the tiltyard, cementing a specific image of Henry in the mind of his kingdom. In an age without portraits hanging in every hall, this scroll was a portable piece of royal majesty. It answered a dynastic tragedy with a declaration of perpetual strength, ensuring that the hope and glory of that single day would never truly die, as long as the parchment could be unfurled to tell its glorious and heartbreaking lie. The painted giants of Valencia swayed through a sea of cheering crowds, their wooden frames carried by hidden dancers. This was the Festa de la Mare de Déu, a celebration where sacred devotion and the spirit of the carnival collided in a riot of color and sound. The processions were a gallery of the fantastic and the absurd. The giants, or gegants, represented noble kings and queens from a legendary past, their serene faces towering high above the people. But dancing around their feet were the capgrossos, the big heads, with their enormous, grotesque papier-mâché heads and comically exaggerated features. These figures were not majestic, they were hilarious and subversive, poking fun at pompous authority figures and making the crowd roar with laughter. The contrast was deliberate, a perfect balance between the solemn and the satirical, the ideal and the irreverent. Then came the MoMA dance, a performance rich with symbolic meaning. The MoMA herself, a man dressed in pure white, represented virtue, while the 7 Momos who surrounded him were dressed as demons, each symbolizing one of the 7 deadly sins. Their dance was a graceful, twisting battle, as the MoMA elegantly evaded the clutches of the sins, never allowing them to soil her pristine costume. It was a morality play in motion, a beautiful and accessible lesson about the constant struggle between good and evil, performed not on a stage but in the living streets. This festival was a unique alchemy. It blended the profound reverence for the Mother of God with the ancient, chaotic energy of a folk carnival. It proved that a pageant could be both a sincere act of faith and a joyous release, a space where a community could honor its divine protector while also laughing in the face of its own human follies. Rouen streets became a river of illusion for its king. When Charles VIII entered the city in 1485, its citizens did more than line the roads with banners. They built an entire mock naval battle in the heart of the urban center. This was a feat of pure imaginative engineering, designed to flatter a young monarch and broadcast the city's own immense prosperity. The centerpiece of the spectacle was a vast, ship-shaped pageant wagon, a detailed replica of a galley, which was pulled through the streets by invisible means. From its decks, costumed sailors engaged in a choreographed fight with another vessel, their wooden swords clashing as the crowd roared its approval. The sheer logistics were staggering, requiring hidden crews to maneuver the heavy floats and actors to perform a complex battle sequence on unstable, moving ground. But why stage a sea battle in a city square? Rouen was a major port, and its wealth flowed directly from maritime trade. This aquatic theater was the city's ultimate commercial advertisement, a vivid declaration that its fortunes were tied to the sea and, by extension, to the king who protected its waters. Every staged cannon blast and triumphant cheer from the sailors was a testament to Rouen's economic vitality. Along the route, other tableaux continued this theme of flattery and loyalty. Elaborate stages depicted scenes from classical history that mirrored Charles' own youth and potential, comparing him to legendary heroes and wise rulers of the past. The entire entry was a masterclass in civic rhetoric, spoken not with words, but with wood, paint, and performance. It asked the king a silent, persuasive question: could any ruler fail to cherish a city so clever, so wealthy, and so utterly devoted to his glory? While kings reviewed their armies, the dark winter streets of Dublin offered a different kind of power. As the year drew to its coldest close, the city prepared for the Yule pageant, a seasonal spectacle of feasting and misrule centered around a most unusual figure, the boy bishop. For a few brief days surrounding the Feast of Holy Innocents, the established order of the church and city was playfully, yet profoundly, turned upside down. A choir boy, elected from among his peers, would be dressed in miniature episcopal robes and given the ceremonial authority of a real bishop. He would lead processions, deliver mock sermons, and even bless the crowds, all while the actual adult clergy stepped respectfully aside. This was not simple child's play, it was a sanctioned ritual of inversion, a pressure valve for a society bound by strict hierarchies. Alongside this ecclesiastical charade, the tradition of mumming thrived. Groups of citizens, their faces hidden by masks or smeared with soot, would move from house to house, performing short, rhyming plays and demanding food and drink in return. Their disguises granted them a temporary anonymity, allowing them to poke gentle fun at their neighbors and superiors without fear of reprisal. The entire community, from the wealthiest merchant to the lowliest servant, participated in this licensed misrule. Why would a medieval city willingly embrace such chaos? The Yule pageant served a crucial social purpose. By ritually inverting the normal power structures, it actually reinforced them. Allowing a boy to play at being a bishop for a day highlighted the awesome, unassailable authority of the real bishop for the rest of the year. Letting mummers mock their betters for an evening safely channeled resentments that might otherwise fester. In the deep gloom of midwinter, when spirits were low and the future seemed uncertain, these festivities forged a powerful sense of communal resilience. The shared feasts, the laughter in the darkened streets, the collective agreement to break the rules just for a little while, all served to bind the people of Dublin together. It was a reminder that their social order was strong enough to withstand a little mockery, and that even in the longest night, there was light and warmth to be found in each other. A vow sworn upon a pheasant's golden collar never launched a single ship to the Holy Land. The Grand Crusade promised at Philip, the Good's magnificent feast remained a beautiful, unfulfilled dream. Yet, in a profound paradox, this very failure cemented the event's legendary status. Chroniclers like Olivier de la Marche did not record it as a disappointment, but as the absolute pinnacle of Burgundian chivalry and artistry. His detailed account, written years later, transformed the feast from a political maneuver into an immortal myth, a story to be read and marveled at in courts across Europe. The Feast of the Pheasant became less about what it failed to achieve and more about what it spectacularly was, a perfect moment of ambition frozen in time. Its influence radiated outward for generations, setting a clear benchmark for what a royal festival should be. When the Tudor kings of England or the Valois monarchs of France planned their own masques and tournaments, they were, in many ways, competing with the ghost of Lille. The feast's core ingredients, a unifying theme, astonishing mechanical wonders, and the fusion of political statement with sheer sensory overload, became the essential blueprint for Renaissance extravagance. It proved that the memory of a spectacle could wield more power than the reality it was meant to inspire. The crusade was forgotten, but the golden pheasant endured, a shining symbol of how a court could burnish its reputation not through successful wars, but through the unforgettable stories it told about itself. The sheer engineering behind these biblical stories was a spectacle in itself. Each guild's pageant wagon was a marvel of mobile stagecraft, a multi-level wooden cart pulled through the narrow streets by teams of men or horses. The lower level was a cramped dressing room and storage space, shrouded in curtains, while the open-air upper platform became everything from heaven's gleaming gates to the depths of a storm-tossed sea. The most famous effect was the hellmouth, a monstrous, gaping puppet head crafted by the craftsmen. Its jaws, operated by hidden levers, would snap shut on condemned souls amid clouds of smoke and the chilling screams of actors, making damnation terrifyingly real for the crowd. For scenes of martyrdom, bladders filled with a mixture of vermilion and pomegranate juice were concealed beneath costumes, bursting on cue to simulate blood with shocking vividness. The amateur actors, all local tradesmen, faced a grueling rehearsal schedule. They practiced for months in guild halls and churchyards, their lines drilled into memory after long workdays, their performances judged by stern guild masters. This was not professional theater, it was a sacred obligation performed by the community for the community. As a wagon rolled to its first station, the actors would perform their play, perhaps the creation of Adam. Then the wagon would trundle to the next stop while the audience remained in place. An hour later, the same crowd would watch Noah building his ark, and later still, the Crucifixion. This moving performance meant the entire city became a living timeline of salvation. You did not go to the play came to you, transforming your familiar street corner into a sacred site. The line between spectator and participant blurred completely. You smelled the smoke from the hellmouth, you felt the spray of fake blood, you cheered for your neighbor playing an apostle. This was not a distant drama, but a story unfolding in your own world, making the divine narrative as immediate and tangible as the cobblestones beneath your feet. A city gate swung open not just for a monarch, but for a carefully negotiated promise. The royal entry was a political conversation spoken in a universal language of symbols, a ritualized dance between a ruler and the city that was both welcoming and setting its terms. This visual vocabulary was repeated across Europe because its meaning was instantly understood by every spectator. The presentation of the city keys was the first crucial act. The mayor and council would formally hand over the massive keys to the city gates, a gesture of submission and trust, but this was not a surrender, it was a loan. The new ruler would almost always hand them back immediately, a public pledge to be a protector, not a conqueror, and to respect the city's ancient liberties. This exchange framed the entire relationship. Further along the route, the city's wealth literally flowed for its sovereign. Elaborate fountains, constructed just for the day, would spout not water, but red and white wine. This was a spectacular display of the city's prosperity, a boast that it was so rich it could pour its most valuable commodities into the streets, yet it was also an act of immense generosity, a shared feast that physically united the ruler and the people in a moment of celebration. The symbolism was potent. The city's economic health would sustain the crown, and in return, the crown's good governance would ensure those fountains never ran dry. Perhaps the most ambitious symbolic gesture was the staging of the Nine Worthies, these 9 paragons of virtue, 3 pagan, 3 Jewish, and 3 Christian, presented a complete model of ideal rulership across all of time. By having actors portray Hector, Alexander, Julius Caesar, and the others pledge their symbolic allegiance to the new king or queen, the city was doing more than flattering its guest. It was holding up a mirror of expectations. It was saying, this is the company you must keep, these are the legendary standards you must now meet. Every element of the entry, from the returning of the keys to the flowing wine and the heroic tableau, was part of a silent, powerful contract. The city pledged its loyalty and its wealth, and the ruler, in turn, accepted the burden of justice, protection, and virtuous rule. It was a perfect piece of political theater where both sides performed their roles, affirming that the business of governance was a shared spectacle, witnessed and ratified by the people themselves. The city of Chester offered its own distinctive rhythm of sacred drama, while York and Coventry staged their biblical cycles on the bustling feast of Corpus Christi. Chester's great performance pulsed to a different calendar, unfolding during the Whitsun week, the celebration of the Holy Spirit's descent. This shift in timing created an entirely different atmosphere. Instead of the single, overwhelming day of performance that defined the York cycle, Chester spread its plays across 3 days, allowing each episode more space to breathe and drawing the community into a longer, more reflective celebration. The city's surviving texts are another treasure, some of the most complete and detailed of all the English mystery cycles. They reveal a cycle marked by a particular flair for narrative and a touch of local character. The Chester plays are known for their prologues and epilogues, where a character called the expositor would step forward to explain the deeper spiritual meaning of the action, guiding the audience's understanding in a way that felt both scholarly and deeply pastoral. The guild assignments in Chester also tell a unique story of civic identity. The water leaders and drawers of Dee, who manage the city's water supply, fittingly staged the play of Noah's flood. Their pageant wagon, a wooden ark built by their own hands, would have been a powerful symbol of their essential role in the life of the city, literally floating through the streets on a sea of spectators. The bakers, responsible for the Last Supper, and the vintners, who staged the miracle at Cana, connected their daily trades directly to the most sacred moments of Scripture. This was more than civic pride. It was a profound act of theological interpretation, where the work of a baker's hands was sanctified by its association with the body of Christ. Chester's cycle demonstrates that while the impulse to stage the Bible was a common thread across England, each city wove it into a tapestry with its own unique pattern, using the familiar stories to express its particular character, its local economy, and its own understanding of the divine narrative unfolding in its very streets. Every feast, every joust, every golden tree was a calculated piece of statecraft. The Dukes of Burgundy, from Philip the Good to Charles the Bold, were not merely patrons of spectacle, they were architects of a grand illusion, using pageantry as their most potent form of political propaganda. Their court was a stage, and every performance was designed to broadcast a single, overwhelming message that Burgundy was not a duchy, but a kingdom in all but name. Their ambition was breathtaking. They sought a royal crown from the Holy Roman Emperor, a title that would elevate them to equal standing with the kings of France and England. Since they could not command this status by ancient right, they had to perform it into existence. The Feast of the Pheasant was not just a call for crusade, it was a dazzling demonstration of wealth so vast it could be poured into fountains of wine and baked into giant pies concealing orchestras. This was economic propaganda, proving their coffers were deep enough to fund empires and holy wars. The Pas de la Berger, the shepherd's joust, was its perfect counterpart, a performance of chivalric virtue and courtly refinement. It showed that their power was not just crude wealth, but was tempered by grace, poetry, and the highest ideals of knighthood. Even the pageant of the Golden Tree was a direct symbolic claim, a declaration that their dynasty was a new golden age, fertile, enduring, and blessed by God. Every element was woven together into a seamless narrative of legitimacy. The dukes surrounded themselves with an aura of divine favor, linking their rule to biblical kings and celestial plans, making their political ambition feel like a cosmic inevitability. They crafted an image of a court that was the unquestioned center of the chivalric world, a beacon of culture, piety, and power. Why wage a costly war for recognition when you could stage a feast so magnificent that everyone who witnessed it simply accepted your superiority? The Burgundian pageants were a brilliant, long-running campaign to make the world believe in a crown, long before it ever physically existed. A single pageant could consume a city's entire annual budget in a matter of days. This was not merely spending, but a form of economic theater, where the lavish dispersal of wealth was as much a part of the spectacle as the golden trees and mechanical beasts. The financial machinery behind these events was staggering, transforming a court or city into a massive, temporary engine of production. For a royal entry, miles of precious cloth were purchased to drape the streets, turning entire neighborhoods into a continuous tapestry of silk and velvet. A single feast required the labor of hundreds of cooks, confectioners, and vintners, working for months to source exotic spices, roast countless oxen, and fill fountains with rivers of wine. The employment boom was immense. Carpenters, painters, and sculptors were hired to build towering stages and elaborate floats. Embroiderers and armorers worked overtime to create costumes and polish armor. Minstrels, actors, and acrobats were all paid from the same deep purse. This surge of work meant that a major pageant functioned like a modern public works project, injecting coin directly into the hands of artisans and laborers, stimulating every level of the local economy from the master craftsman down to the apprentice who carried the wood. Yet this came with a profound burden. For a city like Ghent, forced to stage a grand procession for its duke, the cost could be crippling, a financial punishment disguised as a celebration. For a court like Burgundy, the near-bankrupting expense of the Feast of the Pheasant was a deliberate strategic choice. The duke was not just buying a party, he was purchasing a reputation. He was demonstrating a power so absolute that he could literally set a fortune on fire for a single night's glory, and his treasury would not falter. The economic impact rippled outward for years, through the debts incurred or the taxes levied, but also through the lasting prestige that attracted more trade, more talented artisans, and more political influence. Could there be any clearer demonstration of power than the ability to command an entire economy to pause its normal functions and dedicate itself entirely to the creation of a beautiful, fleeting dream? The golden age of pageants could not last forever. A tide of new ideas began to wash across Europe, and the great communal spectacles, once the heartbeat of cities, found themselves under attack from multiple fronts. The most powerful force of change was the Protestant Reformation, which viewed the elaborate religious dramas with deep suspicion. Reformers argued that these plays, with their vivid depictions of saints and biblical scenes, dangerously blurred the line between worship and entertainment. They saw the mystery cycles not as acts of devotion, but as idolatry, a form of superstition that distracted from the pure Word of God. In England, this theological shift had a direct and devastating consequence. By the late 16th century, the Crown officially suppressed the great biblical cycles of York, Chester, and Coventry. The guilds were forbidden from performing the plays that had defined their civic and spiritual lives for centuries. The colorful wagons that once rolled through the streets were dismantled, the scripts were locked away or lost, and the community's shared sacred story was silenced. It was more than a change in doctrine, it was the death of a tradition that had united entire cities in a common, public faith. At the same time, the rising power of the centralized state was turning its back on the noisy, unpredictable crowds of the city square. Monarchs now preferred the controlled environment of the royal court, where they could stage private, exclusive masques. These indoor performances, often based on classical mythology, were for an elite audience of nobles and diplomats. They were lavish and sophisticated, but they were no longer a conversation between a ruler and the people. They were a statement of power delivered from behind palace walls, a world away from the chaotic, joyful participation of the Midsummer Watch or the York Cycle. Even artistic tastes were evolving. The Renaissance brought a new appreciation for realism and psychological depth in theater, qualities that the grand, symbolic tableau of the medieval pageants often lacked. The focus shifted from community spectacle to the individual genius of the playwright and the professional actor on a fixed stage. The giants and hobby horses began to look like quaint relics of a less civilized past. How could a city's amateur actors competing with the rising stars of the London stage, the forces of religious reform, political centralization, and changing aesthetics conspired to end an era? The streets grew quieter, the guilds turned their budgets elsewhere, and the shared dream of a city transformed into a living Bible or a chivalric paradise slowly faded from memory. The wooden wheels of a pageant wagon still rumble across the cobblestones of York, but the hands that push it now belong to actors and volunteers, not medieval guildsmen. Modern revivals of these ancient spectacles, like the York Mystery Plays performed every few years, are a bridge across centuries, yet they are built on a foundation of scholarly debate and creative guesswork. The central challenge is one of historical accuracy, a puzzle with many missing pieces. How do you stage a play when the original stage directions are lost? The music is a single line of melody without harmony, and the acting style is a mystery described only in fragments of old account books. Directors and historians must make crucial choices. Should the actors speak in the original Middle English, with its unfamiliar rhythms and vocabulary, or use a modern translation to ensure the story connects with a 21st century audience? Should the performance strive for what feels like gritty medieval realism, or embrace the stylized, symbolic nature of the original, where heaven might be a simple platform draped in blue cloth? The debates are lively and ongoing, reflecting our own changing relationship with the past. Some argue for a pure academic reconstruction, while others believe the true spirit of the medieval plays lies in their communal energy, a quality that can only be captured by allowing modern sensibilities to breathe new life into the old words. This tension between authenticity and accessibility is precisely what keeps the revivals so vibrant. When a contemporary audience gasps as the hellmouth snaps shut or laughs at a comic Noah arguing with his wife, they are participating in the same immediate, emotional experience that captivated their ancestors. The ancient stories of creation, sacrifice, and redemption still speak to universal human questions, and seeing them enacted in the open air by a mix of professionals and local amateurs recreates that essential feeling of a whole community grappling with its beliefs. The enduring power of these pageants lies not in a perfect replica of the past, but in their ability to make a 500-year-old story feel as urgent and alive as the day it was first performed. While kings and dukes staged their grand political arguments, another kind of pageant thrived in the shadow of the great cathedrals and castles, one written not by court poets, but by the people themselves. These were the shadow pageants, the folk traditions that pulsed with a raw, earthy energy far removed from the polished ideals of chivalry. In the deep winter, when the fields lay frozen and the nights were longest, the tradition of mumming came to life. Groups of villagers, their identities hidden by masks of cloth or carved wood, would travel from house to house. They performed short, rhyming plays that were often little more than a comical skit, a ritualized fight between a hero like St. George and a villainous Turk, followed by a miraculous resurrection by a comic doctor. The dialogue was simple and repetitive, passed down through generations not in written scripts, but in memory. The true power of this performance was not in its artistic merit, but in its social function. The masks granted a powerful anonymity, allowing the mummers to poke fun at local authorities, demand food and drink from their wealthier neighbors, and momentarily overturn the rigid social order, all under the guise of seasonal custom. This was licensed mischief, a safety valve for the pressures of village life. A similar spirit animated the Plough Monday ceremonies, held the first Monday after the 12th day of Christmas. Young farmhands would drag a decorated plough from door to door, threatening to plough up the doorstep of anyone who refused to give them a coin for a celebratory drink. This was more than simple begging. It was a ritual that acknowledged the community's dependence on the land and the laborers who worked it. Their procession, sometimes led by a fool in an animal skin, was a chaotic, joyful demand for recognition. These folk pageants expressed a deeply localized identity. They were not about empires or theological orthodoxy, but about the harvest, the turning of the seasons, and the intricate social bonds of a single village. They celebrated fertility, mocked pride, and ensured that even the lowest members of society had a voice, however disguised, in the annual cycle of celebration. In the grand narrative of medieval spectacle, these little traditions remind us that the need for communal storytelling and temporary liberation is a universal human impulse, one that flourished not only in the brilliant light of the royal court, but also in the flickering torchlight of a country lane. These 30 famous pageants reveal a world where every public event was a complex tapestry woven from multiple threads of meaning. A single tournament could be both a brutal martial contest and a delicate performance of courtly love. A royal entry was a negotiation of power disguised as a welcome party, while a city's mystery plays transformed faith into a tangible, neighborhood experience. From the biblical cycles of York to the chivalric vows of Burgundy, these spectacles were never just one thing. They were tools of statecraft, expressions of deep piety, and raucous celebrations of local identity, all unfolding simultaneously under the open sky. They demonstrate that for medieval society, the most important truths about power, belief, and community were not written in dusty books, but performed in the shared space of the city square, where everyone from the king to the common apprentice had a role to play. The legacy of these pageants lives on, not just in historical records, but in our modern parades, our state ceremonies, and our own community festivals, which continue that ancient human need to come together and tell a shared story. We would love to hear which of these incredible spectacles captured your imagination the most. Would you choose to witness the golden fantasy of the Feast of the Pheasant, the moving devotion of the Coventry plays, or the civic might of the London Midsummer Watch? Let us know in the comments below, and subscribe to continue exploring the hidden mysteries of the medieval world.